Coming up, Nick Saban reveals some details about how he might use his quarterbacks this fall, and an ESPN writer takes a bit of a shot at Georgia. We'll tell you all about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad you are here with us this weekend. Hope you enjoyed the Combine over the weekend. A lot of talk coming out of that event from there in Indianapolis as a lot of SEC stars get ready to begin their professional future, and a lot of reporters want to find out, hey, tell me about some of this stuff that happened back during the fall.
Yeah, it definitely is one of those situations where it's like anything football related, you're just yearning for it. So you're like any kind of tidbit you can pick up out of the Combine. I think everybody's kind of latching on to that right now.
So we'll get to some of that throughout the day, throughout the week here in SEC Country Live. For now, though, let's start the show with our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and the big news around the SEC, including item number 1 on our list. Nick Saban apparently with some ideas about how his quarterbacks could be used this fall. Talking to one ESPN reporter, we all know the story here. You go back to January, Jalen Hurts benched at the halftime of the national championship game. Tua Tagovailoa takes his plays and then eventually throws the game-winning touchdown pass on, as Alabama fans are wont to remind us, 2nd and 26 during overtime. That leads to the championship. At one point a few days ago, Nick Saban kind of joked about how Tua even got in that position and the comfort that he felt there in that spot. Here is Nick Saban having some fun about the Tua Tagovailoa touchdown pass.
How it happened was I asked Tua after the game, I said, why did you take a sack when we needed a field goal to stay in the game? And he said, we just needed more room to throw the ball. So that's how it happened.
That's pretty funny.
So Saban's got jokes there, but the subsequent quarterback battle in Tuscaloosa may not be a laughing matter here. Chris Lowe, the ESPN writer, catches up with Nick Saban on that. Lowe had a tweet about the exchange. He says the thing to remember about Bama's quarterback situation, and Saban noted this when we talked, is you can't fool the players. They know who's the best quarterback, and that's going to play out in the spring and the preseason. He has no plans to play two, but isn't against it if both prove they can play, quote, winning football. What do you make of Nick Saban saying we would consider playing both Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa if they can both play, quote, winning football? What do you make of that?
It's starting, isn't it, BA?
Oh,
I know that's funny. It's starting. We're starting to go down that road of, two quarterbacks and both guys get the opportunity to play. And I understand why Nick Saban's saying it. I think everybody kind of understands, what's going on in that room, what's going on with that football team. And I honestly believe that, if both quarterbacks are on the roster when the season starts, they'll both get snaps. We've seen that before. We've seen, A.J. McCarron versus Phillip Sims. We've seen, even last, 2 years ago, Jalen Hurts comes in and takes over the starting job midway through the first game. So I don't think that he's stepping out and lying about both of these guys getting the opportunity to play and it being an open competition. I think it definitely will. But I don't see Alabama going through an entire season next year. I mean, we saw the possibility of it this year. This was the most talented they're going to have in 2 quarterbacks this season, and you didn't see Tua in meaningful snaps until, obviously, the last half of the football season.
Yeah, I mean, if you were ever going to play 2 quarterbacks and play them for a full season, it would seem like that Tua and Hurts would be the kind of quarterbacks you could do that with because they are so different. I mean, Tua's not an unathletic player, but he's more of a thrower than a runner, and Jalen Hurts is way more of a runner than a thrower. I think throwing may be, pretty far down the list on what he's good at. So if you had 2 quarterbacks to sort of be perfect fits for a dual role, these 2 guys are it. But the assumption on my part here, though, is that Tua Tagovailoa, all the skills considered, is just better than Jalen Hurts. And I got to tell you, and I'm not trying to stir up trouble here, but if I'm going to negative recruit against Nick Saban in the future, this is one of those areas in which I'm going to be looking to negative recruit him. If he, and you said a minute ago, this is starting, it's starting, and I've been saying this, they were going to talk up Hurts during the offseason. We may play both quarterbacks. Hurts is actually outplaying Tua during the spring. Get ready to hear that. Hurts is outplaying him during the summer. Get ready to hear that. Hurts taking more snaps in those early season games that don't really matter. But by late September, October, November, I believe all the snaps are going to Tua Tagovailoa. And if I'm going to negative recruit against Nick Saban, this is how I'm going to do it. He cannot be trusted with what he says about his players. He said this to Jalen Hurts just to keep him from transferring, and then when he was locked in for the season, he went ahead and played Tua Tagovailoa the way we all knew he was going to. If that happens, I think you've got to call Nick Saban a liar, and I think you've got to point this out to recruits.
Well, I don't think he's lying about anything yet. I mean, I think he honestly believes it's an open competition. I think all Alabama's players honestly believe it's an open competition. So I don't see it as him lying. What I see him doing is kind of posturing to say, don't leave yet. You're going to get every opportunity. Because I think if he comes out and says, well, Tua, obviously had a good game, he'd be the leader going into the fall. What's that going to get you? That's going to be Tua, who feels comfortable about his job, and that's going to be Jalen, who's going to be seeking to transfer.
Yeah.
And so I don't see it as Nick lying. I don't see it as Nick misleading. I think he honestly feels this way, but I don't think Nick Saban. I guess my knock on the entire situation and making comment on this is Nick Saban's not a guy who's going to play 2 quarterbacks for the length of a season. I think you leave yourself open to the possibility because 2 guys' skill sets are so different. But I think in the long run, when it comes to the nitty gritty, when you get down to those times when you have to, have the 2-minute drives and have your team get back in the game, I don't think Nick Saban's the 2 quarterback kind of guy. Maybe drive by drive, but I think it's going to have to be specific situation.
Let me get a few comments starting here on Facebook Live. Ryan M says, what about the quarterback who transferred from East Carolina? Is he not going to even play? I mean, I think you and I both have thought that Gardner Minshew was only an insurance policy this entire time.
He's definitely an insurance policy, a nice one to have. But if we're talking about 2 guys that have been in the system for a couple of years now, he's going to have an uphill climb.
Chad Clark says Saban's it's just a Saban gimmick to keep Jalen Hurts. Trey Duke says, no, Alabama's not going to play 2 quarterbacks. That's a lot of folks who are not Alabama fans, by the way, not really buying into Nick Saban's line of thinking here on this at all. Teresa Stewart says they're going to hurt Jalen Hurts' feelings. I mean, it's kind of funny how unanimous the commenters' opinions are. My opinion in that Tua Tagovailoa is just the better quarterback between the two, between he and Jalen Hurts. But we've been surprised in sports before. I guess the one part of this conversation I do want to kind of leave some room for, is there a chance that what we saw happen at the end of last season is not what would happen over the course of a full season? Is there still a chance that maybe Jalen Hurts, the more experienced player, by the way, could actually still be better than Tua Tagovailoa?
I think that Jalen Hurts is the safer of the 2. I think you saw that in the second half. I mean, Tua comes out, he throws a pick on one of the first drives. He takes a couple of sacks that he shouldn't have. He should have been sacked more than he was. Actually, if you look at some of the escape tackles that he made, it was pretty incredible that he was able to do that. A better tackler in some of those situations probably takes Tua down. But, it's like I said, we've seen this before. In 2010 or 2011, A.J. McCarron and I think it was Phillip Sims were battling for the starting job. They go on the road to Penn State. Both these guys are playing in the first half and they're battling on the field. That was as close to a 2-quarterback system as I feel like we've really seen really deep into kind of the season for Nick Saban.
Rocky Smith says, hey, Jalen's proven himself with 25 wins. Here's the question, though. I know that his time in Alabama predates Tua Tagovailoa, so this is not a perfect question, but if you want to give Jalen Hurts the credit for the 25 wins, you have to point to a win that he had that Jalen Hurts wouldn't have gotten. I'm sorry, that Tua Tagovailoa wouldn't have gotten. And I'm not sure there's an example of that. But there's at least one win, or there is a win that Tua got that Jalen Hurts was going to get because we all saw that play out. So I'm not so sure that the 25 wins that Jalen Hurts has is an argument for playing him over Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there's definitely instances you could see. I mean, even 2 years ago, we'll go back to see Jalen Hurts in Baton Rouge playing against LSU. Jalen Hurts had that long run to kind of ice the game away where it was 10-0. That might be a game you point to, but other than that, I mean, I do feel like you have to give credit for everything Jalen Hurts has done, but it's 2 completely different offenses when each of these guys come in or out.
Justin Del Marco says, that's fake news, BA. The best player is going to be on the field at the end of the day. I agree with Justin probably on both accounts. I think here's the one thing that I might disagree with Justin on and you might disagree with me on. If it's fake news, the fake news is being perpetrated by Nick Saban here. It's not being perpetuated by blowhards like me in the media who people want to pick on all the time. This is not a media-created fake news thing. This is a Nick Saban-created fake news thing. If the news is fake, Saban's the one who's baking it.
Well, that's possible. But I think what Nick is trying to say in these instances, and obviously you guys know what my background is. I played for Nick Saban. But I think what he's trying to say in this instance is you guys have only seen him really meaningful snaps for one half of football. Let's get this out over spring. Let's see who kind of takes hold of the leadership on this offense throughout the summer and does it throughout fall camp. And then if Tua comes out of all that and is still the leader, then he'll be our starting quarterback. I think that Nick just sees it as that was one half of football. There's still a long way to go in this competition.
We got a lot of comments coming in on this, as you might imagine. We'll sort of sound off on this the rest of the day, and really for the rest of recorded history. I mean, in some form or fashion, who starts a quarterback for Alabama is the kind of subject we'll probably be doing a lot here over the course of the next few weeks. Let me move on, though, for a moment here to item number 2 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. I'm actually really curious to get Mike's opinion on this, a situation involving Georgia. Now, Heather Dinich is an ESPN reporter who covers the college football playoff. And last week here in SEC Country Live, you may remember, we actually talked about her list of most pivotal games in the upcoming season. We actually talked about that a good bit here on our show. And she goes on the Feinbaum show on Friday to talk about the same article. Now, Paul wasn't there. Our buddy Tony Barnhart was filling in for Paul Feinbaum that day. But the subject of one of the games we mentioned, Georgia-Auburn, comes up. And in the midst of talking about how important the Georgia-Auburn was going to be this season, Heather also talks about the Georgia schedule and what she views as a pretty wretched opinion of Georgia, at least from a non-conference standpoint. Listen to her takedown of Georgia. Tell me if you agree.
If you look at Georgia's non-conference schedule, it is atrocious. Everybody ragged on Wisconsin last year. Everybody ragged on Washington 2 years ago. Well, I'm telling you, Georgia, you better win every other game because that non-conference schedule stinks.
So that's Heather Dinich saying the non-conference schedule for Georgia is atrocious, that it stinks, they got to win every other game because of the fact that, how bad their non-conference schedule is. The floor is yours because people could probably guess that I'm going to defend Georgia in this, and I'm going to, although maybe not for the reasons people think that I'm going to. But nonetheless, I will defend Georgia in a moment for those that expect me to do just that. So you don't have the same dog in the fight that I do. You tell me what you think about what Heather has to say.
Yeah, same dog in the fight, no pun intended, right?
Right.
I think that, listen, just as being an Alabama guy and being one of these teams that are in the West that looks at teams like Georgia, and Florida's in this bracket, South Carolina as well, where I usually give Georgia and Florida and those other teams a pass on their non-conference schedule because they are going out of conference to play these games at the end of the year. Georgia Tech, Clemson, Florida State, they're playing these teams from the ACC, and they're going out of their way to play these teams every single year. And Alabama doesn't have that. Alabama plays Auburn, a conference opponent. Tennessee is going to play Vanderbilt. LSU's got its team that it's playing at the end of the year as well. And so I give Georgia a pass in a lot of these instances, whereas Alabama, when they schedule Louisville, when they schedule Michigan, when they schedule Wisconsin or USC, I feel good about that. Georgia didn't step out and do that this year, and I think that's okay in my opinion. Now, it's going to be interesting to see this story develop because I'm not ready to throw them to the wolves yet. I'm not saying, boy, Georgia, you really messed up, boy. The schedule's terrible. But it will be interesting for Alabama this year too because Louisville's not what Louisville was in years past. As this develops, and as you mentioned this last year, as the nation gets tired of SEC teams getting the benefit of the doubt, getting in the college football playoff, if Alabama, Georgia, any other team in the SEC stumbles in one of these games or stumbles in somewhere along their schedule, it's going to be really interesting to see what's thrown against them at the end of the year when all these decisions are being made.
So here's my argument for Georgia on this, and if you think that I'm just making this as a Georgia fan, then at least try to listen to the substance of what I'm saying, and you can tell me then if you disagree. The biggest problem I have in college football is when we sort of isolate the non-conference schedule and sort of separate it as some sort of separate entity away from the total schedule. Heather makes the comparison to last year's Wisconsin team. The problem with Wisconsin on paper, though, is not just the non-conference schedule. Wisconsin did go on the road to BYU. It's the fact that if you looked at that schedule preseason, they only played against one preseason top 25 team, whereas Georgia's going to play at least 3 AP preseason top 25 teams. At LSU, that's a preseason top 25 team. They're going to play Auburn, that's going to be a preseason top 10 team. South Carolina is going to be a preseason top 25 team. So it seems sort of weird to sort of nitpick a small element of the Georgia schedule when Georgia's going to have 3 preseason top 25 teams, at least on its schedule. That to me does not seem like some embarrassment of a schedule, even if the non-conference games themselves are, probably leaving something to be desired. It's also worth pointing out that Georgia played North Carolina in 2016, played Notre Dame last season, played Notre Dame again in 2019, and plays Georgia Tech every single year. So this is not Georgia ducking competition. This just happens to be a year when they don't have one of those games scheduled. But that's sort of beside the point to me. The Georgia schedule overall is going to be fine because it's the SEC compared to the Big Ten West. And the biggest argument against teams like Wisconsin is they come from a division that just does not have the kind of talent, the kind of teams to be serious in a national championship conversation. I'm sorry, no team from the Big Ten West will ever win the national championship. Not Nebraska anymore, not Iowa, not Wisconsin. You can draw a big red X on that entire part of the the entire part of the map. That portion of the map is not going to produce a national champion. It's great for dairy farms. It's not good for national championship.
No, and here's the thing, too, and it's like I said, I think you're hitting the nail on the head when you talk about it's a small portion of their schedule. And traveling to LSU is going to be a tough game. I don't care. And I feel the same way about Georgia Tech. I don't care where these teams are. I don't care what they are right now, what they're ranked. Those are tough games. Anytime Georgia plays Georgia Tech, it's a tough game. Anytime you go to Baton Rouge to play LSU, it's a tough game. So, yeah, you can tell me about Austin, PA, or however you say that name, or you can tell me about Middle Tennessee. That doesn't matter to me. I think you look at the schedule as a whole and you rate it about teams they're playing from the top down. I think, obviously you're looking at South Carolina being a good team. You mentioned LSU as the crossover game. You mentioned some other names up and down their schedule. Not to mention, if Georgia does win all those games, they will be playing in an SEC championship as well.
On YouTube, 98 Sports Talk says SEC teams, lost the comment, SEC teams don't need to schedule tough out-of-conference. Let me see if here's what it says. SEC teams don't need tough out-of-conference opponents like others do. There's a certain extent to which that's true because SEC teams are obviously tougher for the most part than just the generic team from outside the country. It's also possible to play a weak SEC schedule. All I'm going to tell you is when the Georgia schedule includes Auburn and LSU from the SEC West, that's not an example of a weak SEC schedule. Compared to Wisconsin a year ago, who during the regular season did not have Penn State on the schedule, did not have Ohio State. Georgia's crossover SEC West games, though, are plenty tough here.
Right. No, that's kind of where I'm going with the whole conversation too. And listen, let's not forget their crossover game every year is Auburn as well. I mean, it's that's going to be a tough game this year too. So don't pick out a small fraction of it for me. I understand what she's saying because the argument nationally, like you've said a million times, is kind of an anti-SEC bias where it feels like to a lot of people that aren't part of the SEC that the SEC gets these breaks. But point to the whole schedule. Tell me what good teams are playing down the road, and I'll tell you how much better that schedule is in Wisconsin.
Andy Anderson over on Facebook Live says, BA, cut it out. You play in the SEC East. You guys killed me with that, quote, we play in the SEC rhetoric. But it's not just the SEC East. It's also LSU and Auburn from the SEC West. You got to count that. I mean, Georgia's got a preseason game schedule, or a game schedule from the vantage point of the preseason has a game schedule. The top 10 ranked Auburn team. Most of the country can't say that going into the year.
Yeah, and you know what I've always loved about Georgia too is at least when I was playing. I mean, they had the out of conference games against Arizona State. Maybe they played Colorado at one point. I mean, I'm trying to go back to when I was in school. Georgia's always done the home and homes, the Notre Dames, there's things like that where you go to a place. It's not always, the neutral opener, which they've done that too. But this is just one of those years it's not like that. And listen, their crossover schedule, the SEC West, is as tough as a crossover schedule as you're going to find in the country.
Joel Anthony Dean says about my 3 potential preseason teams that Georgia would play to start the season. He says, yeah, but how many will actually be ranked when they do play? That's a fair question. Some will be better, some will be worse. But if one of those 3 teams that I mentioned falls out of the rankings, you also at least have to open the door a possibility that some other team could kind of rise up into the rankings. But Joel, that's certainly a fair question. We'll take more of your comments on this subject throughout the day here on SEC Country Live. Kyle Gobble included, who says Wisconsin's the Big Ten West doesn't compare to Georgia in the SEC East. Preach BA. Listen, I don't need any extra motivation to want to tell it like it is when it comes to stuff like that. But Kyle, I appreciate you weighing in on the comment section. As I said, we'll continue to take these throughout the day here on SEC Country Live. A lot of very passionate comments kind of rolling through all day long today, and I certainly appreciate that. Let me talk about Auburn spring practice here for a moment, though, on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. It's item number 3 here, and Auburn's been rolling, starting spring practice before a lot of teams in the SEC. I guess it's Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Auburn. Is it the 4 teams that have started thus far?
Yeah, as far as I know, those are 4 teams that have kicked things off for sure.
And, of course, with Auburn spring practice starting, media having their questions, one of the questions that sort of comes up right now more than anything else is what's going to happen to these Auburn running backs. Now, we know that Jarrett Stidham, the quarterback's not going through practice right now. He'll be practicing after spring break. At least that's the expectation. But that puts even more attention on replacements for Cameron Petway, replacements for Kerryon Johnson. And Gus Malzahn said of the 5 running backs that he's kind of got going through the works right now, he think all of these guys could potentially be like 20 carry-a-game guys if they had to be. He's pretty impressed with the depth of his running back situation, even if we don't know who the starters that are going to emerge are yet. In fact, here's what Malzahn had to say about that.
Yeah, I think they can. And, I think just over the last 5 years or whatever, there's been times that, hey, can these guys get it done? Can this group, are you worried about running back depth? I know, and if you look at our history, every time we've had somebody step up, and most times we've had 2 guys step up, and so we still feel the same. I mean, the good thing is right now is we got some very talented running backs. So we're going to let them compete and, hopefully get an order by the time we leave spring. But I really feel like we got multiple guys that can do the job. It's just a matter of who can do the job the best.
Morgan Rection in the comment section, and Morgan, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, said Florida's going to be stat at running back this year too. And Morgan, that's probably true. The difference at Florida, though, is we know most of those names. We know who they are. I think what makes the Auburn situation a little more interesting is the fact that we don't really know who the names, is it an ASA Martin, is it a
Yeah.
Malik Miller, is it a Cam Martin kind of in that sort of like featured role this season? We don't really know those names yet for Auburn. There's obviously going to be questions about the pecking order and sort of who's stepping up and in front of who. But if you want to make sort of like a bigger sort of 30,000 foot projection on all of this, I continue to believe that Auburn's going to be fine at running back. I'm as curious as anybody who the running backs are that do step up, but I have no doubt that Auburn's good at running back, whichever names we finally land.
I agree with you. I don't think this is, boy, we got to find one of those guys. It's more like, boy, which one is it going to be? And I think that Gus Malzahn did a great job of kind of pointing this out and saying, listen, we've got a ton of playmakers. We want to find out which one is the complete back. And to me, that's a little bit of insight going back, and I've talked about this name a few times, Jartavius Whitlow. He talked about through bowl practice a ton, about picking up blitzes, about knowing the protections. That's going to be the big key to me. And 98 Sports Talks, he asked me on the YouTube page, do you think ASA Martin can win that job? I definitely think ASA Martin can win the job. I think the talent's there. I don't think you're going to be lacking for guys that can make plays in space, that can make plays with an offensive line, especially with Jarrett Stidham in the passing game looking like they might look this year. But I want to know who can protect. If you're telling me who's going to get the most snaps this year, I'm telling you I'm going to put my money on Jartavius Whitlow. I'm seeing through what Gus Malzahn's saying. He wants a complete back, a guy that can be their first, second, and third down. I don't know if ASA Martin's going to be ready for that. That is a lot to ask of a guy that just showed up on campus. I mean, he points to Cam Martin, he points to Malik Miller, Devin Barrett, other guys that have been on this program and in this roster for a while. I think those are the guys you have to lean on first. Obviously, Harold Joyner, ASA Martin, those guys are going to be great. The freshmen are going to be playmakers at some point this year, but I want to know who can pick up the blitzes, who can do the other things around the running back position.
On Facebook, Tyler Williams says, I say Jartavius Whitlow, to go back to the name you just mentioned, is going to be the guy with Cam Martin second string. I'm a little bit surprised that, I certainly get why people like Whitlow, but I'm a little surprised to hear an Auburn fan saying Cam Martin just second string. What I saw from Martin last year when he was fully healthy, and at the end of the season he probably wasn't fully healthy, but what I saw from him when he was fully healthy was this was a guy that could have helped shoulder some of the load I thought last year too.
Yeah, he's definitely explosive, and it's not like I'm trying to step out and say he's not going to have a piece. I think it could be a two-headed deal, just like Cam and Kerryon were when they were at their height. They were both kind of feeding off each other. They were both in different situations, both part of a screen game that I think is going to be necessary with Jarrett Stidham next year. But if you're asking me who's going to get the most snaps, I'm going to have to go back to the fact that Jarrett Stidham's going to be passing ball a lot this year. This is going to be an offensive line that could be built to actually pass protect with Prince Tega. I'm thinking that Jartavius Whitlow can step in there and pick up some of the blitzes and still make plays with his legs.
Maurice Carter, who's a Georgia fan, says on Facebook, I really don't think Auburn has any running backs they've had in the past to make a big difference. The names on paper may not be quite as impressive, although I think that ASA Martin, who is essentially the Alabama Player of the Year coming into high school, I think he could have a really good career. But even if what you're saying is true on paper, these running backs look less impressive than what Auburn's had in the past. I'm a believer that, we talk about system quarterbacks from time to time.
Yeah.
I think that Auburn also creates a system running back scenario here, and I think that being in this Auburn system is probably pretty good for running backs. Listen, I'm not going to tell you that Gus Malzahn is perfect in every way as a coach, but he's generally had a pretty good running game. They've done a pretty good job of compiling rushing yards. I am going to trust that system, even if I don't trust the individual names in this roster.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to back up what 98 Sports Talk is saying on the YouTube page. That I think the bigger question here is how do you piece together the offensive line? We're talking about a new offensive line coach. We've said it a million times. Who comes in and plays these big spots? Is it Calvin Ashley? Do you get Calvin Anderson out of Rice as the grad transfer? Do you find guys to really fit in the places on this offensive line that will allow these running backs to be good? Because there's never really been a shortage of running backs at Auburn. You go all the way back, for a few years, every year they seem to put somebody out there that's getting 1,000 yards rushing. Who's going to be in front of him blocking, I think, is a bigger question. Interesting
opinion from Stephen Rawlinson on the Facebook comment section, who says, I think this is one of the best running back situations that Auburn's had during Malzahn's time. So that's kind of a sort of a retort to someone who says, hey, I'm not sure these running backs are as good as what we've seen in the past. Stephen says, I think they may be better than what Malzahn's had, at least in terms of the total number of potential backs here.
Boy, it's tough to say after Kerryon Johnson leaves, because Kerryon Johnson's one of those guys that, you saw it too, like I saw it, he would take over games. And so I don't know if I'm ready to say, maybe as a whole, and I think you can look at the depth and say as a whole, the room definitely might be better overall, but boy, it's tough to replace a guy like Kerryon Johnson.
Yeah, but how much of the taking over games, though, is about, Chip Lindsey, when he did have, reins of the offense, was making things a little tougher to defend than what Malzahn may have been doing when Red Ashley was the offensive coordinator, and how much of Kerryon Johnson's success was benefited by the fact that you also had Jarrett Stidham at quarterback, someone else that defense really had to think about. All of a sudden now, you have to defend Auburn, horizontally. You have to defend them vertically, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the field, that leaves some space open for a guy like Kerryon Johnson in a way that would not have existed if a quarterback like Nick Marshall been there.
It's definitely a good conversation to have, but obviously, I don't want to go off on this tangent right now, but I was just a huge fan of Kerryon Johnson's running style. It was very Le'Veon Bell. It was very, allow my lineman to get time. Let me dip my head into this hole and then back out and go that way after somebody's getting blocked. I just loved his running style. It was unlike any other running style I saw in the SEC last year. I've seen in college football for quite some time, and so I'm not ready to just brush Kerryon Johnson's career aside, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think he was very unique. They've been great running backs at Auburn, don't get me wrong, but I think he was very unique in the way that he could play with linemen and make the guys in front of him better.
Kay Thompson on YouTube also mentioning what Auburn loses on defense, whether it be Trey Matthews, Carlton Davis out of the secondary. By the way, we'll talk more about Davis later on in the show. Obviously mentioned Jeff Holland there, the pass rusher they've got to replace. So there's some big replacements necessary on that defensive side of the ball for Auburn too.
Yeah, the secondary is going to be one of those tough spots, just like offensive line for them. And they've got the weapons back there. We've talked about, we talked about it last week. Some of the guys that you feel like can make contributions at the safety position back there, but. I go back to Carlton Davis just the way I did Kerryon Johnson. He was just a unique level of talent. I'm not ready to say that they're going to plug somebody in right away that will be that good. I think it's going to have some time to kind of get their wheels up under them.
Item number 4 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list, Antonio Callaway, the former Florida Gator, going through the NFL Combine this weekend and talking a lot about the time that he spent at Florida and the time that he spent there at the end not being on the football field. Apparently Callaway blaming himself a little bit for the end of the Jim McElroy era. I saw this one quote I thought in particular was kind of interesting. He says, I didn't get the chance to talk to him about McElroy's departure. I knew him getting fired and all that was because of me, because of the season they had. I know I could have made a big difference. You believe Callaway there that him being on the field could have maybe saved Jim McElroy's job?
I think that they would have had more opportunities. I don't see how you can disagree with that, but this goes back to the conversation we had last year. This is before the credit card deal or whatever the fallout was that got him suspended for the year. You remember when he got arrested last year and he was with the random guy that had the rap sheet and we were like, how many more times are they going to let Antonio Callaway go through this thing before they're like, you know what, we can't depend on you. We can't depend on you as a player. There's guys in that locker room that take ownership of situations like this, and at some point you have to look past the guy's talent and say, you know what, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're just not going to show up. And that's how I look at the situation with Antonio Callaway. It's almost sad to me because here's a guy that the Gator Nation was so excited about, a guy who's, it could have gone through the roof with the things he did on the field, and just chose to kind of be reckless of what his career ended up being.
Ken Sagini in the comment section, and Ken, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I apologize if I didn't. He says, Callaway's out of touch with reality like Jim McElroy was with his death threats. I will admit there's an extent to which I think that Callaway is a little bit out of touch here, not just with his own personal reality, but with the reality of what Florida's supposed to be. Yes, there were some close games that Florida lost last year that maybe it could have won with even one extra player on the roster. Callaway could have been that. But it almost seems like Callaway, because of the fact that he played for Jim McElroy, is sort of unaware of what Florida's supposed to be. I mean, the issue here is not could one more player have gotten Florida bowl eligible. The issue here is, and I say this as a Georgia fan, Florida's not supposed to be losing to Georgia 42-7. Florida's not supposed to be, getting beat by as many teams as it got beat by in 2017. So for Callaway to say, hey, I'm the missing piece in what could have been a better team for Florida, it's still not the team that Florida should have by its own standards there. And I think that's when you have a coach like Jim McElroy who didn't shoot high enough, who didn't aspire to enough success, I think the thing that you have to sort of deal with in the aftermath is it poisons the mind of the players, both for players like Antonio Callaway, who doesn't realize what Florida had been just a few years before he got there because he was young and probably wasn't paying that much attention, and for any of the players that played for McElroy, this is Dan Mullen's job to sort of reprogram to think, Florida's about championships, not scratching and clawing for bowl eligibility.
No, I completely agree with that, but I agree with his point that things could have turned out differently for Jim McElroy last year had Antonio Callaway been a part of the program. Had all those players, the 10 players that were suspended, been a part of the program, I think things go differently. When you look at their schedule, they lost 17-16 to LSU. They lost 19-17 to Texas A&M. They get the off week, and then they get blown out by Georgia. And I think that's really where the wheels come off, where you say, boy, Antonio Callaway gets a ball, makes a player miss, you get an extra field goal, you get an extra touchdown. Jordan Scarlett's the same way. Some of the other players on this field could have made an impact where, you go from 4 wins, all of a sudden you're in 6 wins, and all of a sudden Jim McElroy still has a little bit of credibility around the program.
I agree with Rick Keene, who's a Florida fan. He probably doesn't want me to agree with him, but I'm going to agree with him nonetheless. He says Coach Mack being fired is no one's fault but his own. Him not developing a quarterback, an atrocious offense, along with not keeping his mouth shut is what got him fired. Don't give yourself that much credit, Callaway. I actually agree with Rick on this because you mentioned a couple games. close loss to Texas A&M, close loss to LSU. Had Florida won those games, that would have been a reason for Gators fans to celebrate at the time. But if Florida had taken what was a close loss and turned it into a close win, the program's actually in no better shape right now.
I agree.
I mean, the record would have looked different. Maybe you don't have as much justification to fire McElroy, although Florida may have just been ready to move on. Nonetheless, they may have found that justification with the death threat stuff. But had Florida squeaked by and gotten those wins, all the stuff that Rick just said is still true. They just would have flipped a close loss and turned it into a close win.
Yeah.
So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is, for Florida fans themselves, I think they have to look at the Antonio Callaway situation and say, thank goodness it didn't turn out different. Because you are in a better position now than you would have been not too long ago.
I completely agree with that. I think that under Dan Mullen, obviously the trajectory has changed. I think that you feel like you're going in a different direction than you were in a Jim McElroy. And as a Florida fan, I'm sure Rick King can back this up. I think he feels great about where the program's headed currently. I think that Dan Mullen, the sky's the limit. But I do agree, like I said, with Antonio Callaway, that had he been on the field, things would have turned out differently. Their schedule could have, they could have broke even in some of these games, and they could have, come out as winners in some of these close games. So I think Antonio Callaway's right. Do I think he's delusional about the direction of the program and the future of it? Maybe so, if he thinks he could have changed the direction of Gator football, but I do think he could have changed 2017.
To change the subject here briefly for a moment, Arsenio Elliott says, ASA Martin rushed for, this is the Auburn incoming freshman, rushed for over 2,000 yards, was a 4-star player, the top player in the state of Alabama. How are y'all not impressed with him? I feel like that's being unfair. I gave Asa a ton of credit a moment ago. I have talked up ASA Martin more than anybody has.
I don't think anybody's listen, I'm not impressed with Asa Martin at all.
I think he's actually talking to you. That's a good point.
Well, Gus Malzahn comes out and says, it's not like we're going to be without playmakers. Listen, for me saying that I don't know that a freshman running back is going to start at a place like Auburn, I don't think that's discrediting him at all. I just think that running backs, if you read Gus Malzahn's comments, it was about who can be a third down back, who can pick up the blitzes, who can do everything within the offense. Asa Martin's going to be fine. He's going to be a great player. He's going to be one of those guys that can make people miss in the open field. But if you're telling me he's ready to walk on the field and pick up blitzes from SEC defenses he's going to see, Alabama, Georgia next year, I don't know if he's ready to do that. I'll have to see that with my own 2 eyes.
Jason Lyons says, going back to the Florida topic, he says, also the strength and conditioning program under Jim McElroy was pitiful. It was bad from top to bottom. He won with the Muschamp talent. To the extent that he did win, I agree with that. And I'm going to try to be very careful how I say this because I don't want to pile on too much here. But it's hard to imagine an Alabama player assuming that he's got that much individual impact in any one game. You would expect them to have a little bit more of an idea of what the process is and how one player sort of fits into the process. It almost sounds like from Antonio Callaway speaking there that he thinks he's like, LeBron James or some sort of like one-man gang, a football version of that. Right. He's going to step on the field and sort of change the results of games. The fact that that attitude could have festered in his mind, I think, is another indictment on Jim McElroy.
Well, I think it's another indictment on Antonio Callaway if you really want to get technical with it, because Antonio Callaway, we mentioned this word last year talking about Antonio Callaway. It's just selfish. At certain times when you keep getting in trouble and your team's really counting on you, it gets to be selfish. And I don't know how many incidents exactly he had at Florida, but it had to have been around 4. And so I think his comments kind of back up what he was of this program over a few years.
One more on Facebook, then I'll get a few more on YouTube. Bo Molinari says, who is an A&M fan, but he says, I don't see anything to suggest Florida is on the rise. All signs say this program is in disarray. I'm going to leave this one alone. This one's straight for you. Are there signs that point to Florida being a team on the rise?
Well, I think that I look at strength and conditioning because, listen, they had the talent last year on offensive line to be a dominant group. Jim McElroy even said, boy, we're going to really lean on the offensive line this year. But when I saw that offensive line against Michigan and some of the other games, Georgia, they played, they looked out of shape. They looked sloppy at times. Martez Ivey, who was billed as the next left tackle down at Florida, ended up the season at guard. And I just didn't see it come to fruition. And I go back to the fact that this is still a decently talented roster. Now, it's not over the top. There was no top 5 signing classes under Jim McElroy, but they still have enough talent at the top. When you look at this defensive line, when you look at the members they're going to have in the secondary, when you look at some of the offensive playmakers, they still have talent at the top that I still think can make an impact if they're put in the right situations and they're developed the right way under Dan Mullen and he finds a quarterback for the situation and they get in better shape next year.
Over on YouTube for a second. By the way, every time I look at YouTube, I see comments that you've been typing.
Yeah, I'm all on this thing.
Are you listening to me or are you typing with your friends over on YouTube?
Not really, I'm talking to YouTube.
See, this is the level of disrespect that I deal with all day long. Y'all trash me in the comment section. Mike's not even listening. You have no idea what the people who work on the show say about me on a daily basis. It'd be nice to come into work one day and have a chance to feel good about myself. But nonetheless, on YouTube, Tyler Mann says, everyone's sleeping on LSU and our quarterback, our offense. We're going to show everybody what's up. He's talking about Miles Brennan. He has a lot to praise when it comes to Miles Brennan. I'm going to let you have this one too. Is LSU being slept on currently?
And the point was made over here on the YouTube section. You never sleep on LSU because of the talent they're going to have on the roster, and I completely agree with that. I still, we talked about it a ton. Steve Ensminger is going to have to show me that he's a great offense coordinator and can do more with less, because the fact is that I don't know what Miles Brennan is. I don't know what Steve Ensminger is. I don't know what that offensive line will be. I think they've got a lot of range and a lot of ability at the wide receiver position, but you can look at that offense and you can say, boy, they could be really good or they could be really bad. We don't know about the running back position. So I think there's some good recruits and there's good talent. If they're able to put it all together, I think they could, take out some of the top teams. I think they could make a run at Alabama. I think they could definitely make a run at Georgia. But there's also a situation in the back of my head where it doesn't play out very well. And so I think that's what when you say don't sleep on LSU, nobody sleep on an LSU. I'll never sleep on LSU. But I'm going to have to see it before I can really put them into the top 10 of teams in the polls and believe that they're going to pull off some of these upsets next
Let me go back to the Callaway thing real quickly, because Kevin Chapman's got a good comment on Facebook. He says, if you're a big-time player and don't give 100%, then your team won't either. Callaway was that player who never played to 100% of his ability. Now he admits it. And that's kind of the point you were mentioning a moment ago, that maybe he's kind of coming around here. I am very skeptical, though, of these sort of battlefield conversions all of a sudden. It's like he realizes,
especially right now.
Yeah, it's like I'm about to get paid in the NFL if I can make a nice story here. So he starts saying that. I'm going to be very suspicious about that.
Yeah, there's always reason, and we're about to talk about one later because I'm going to go down that road here on the backside of this top 10 where there's some more suspicious comments coming out of this combine.
Oh yeah, I look forward to that coming out in a minute. For now, let me move on to item number 5 here on our SEC Country Line 1st and 10. Listen, on Friday, the news that broke around the SEC was good for Tennessee. That Keller Christ, the graduate Stanford quarterback from Stanford, is transferring from the Cardinal. He's going to Knoxville, Tennessee. He's going to be part of Jeremy Pruitt's first team there at Tennessee. He made it official way that so many young men do these days by showing it to us on social media. Great Smoky Mountains in the background, the home sweet home with the power T in the middle. Go Vols is what he says, and that is all you need to know. Keller Christ is on his way to Knoxville. I'm a big believer here that even if Christ does not end up being a great quarterback for Tennessee, and there's a chance that he won't even start, even if he doesn't, I think for Vols fans, this is a good sign for Jeremy Pruitt, because I believe what I said last week, that this is sort of a pressure moment for Pruitt. They need another quarterback, and he needs to show he can execute here in this role, bring him in. It's one thing to do some long-range recruiting and sell a bunch of early playing time. It's another thing in a short-term environment to sort of sell yourself in a position of need to a guy that's got some choices. Pruitt pulled that off. The one thing if you're Tennessee got to be worried about is my coach capable of handling the role of head coach for the first time? By bringing in Keller Christ, even if Christ ends up busting out, by bringing him in, it's at least one piece of evidence that this job may not be too big for Jeremy Pruitt, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, boy, but you're going with my trending in the right direction kind of comment, right? Yeah. I mean, I feel like some of these programs, when they're trending in the right direction, any good news to me keeps them on track and keeps them kind of, the status going in the right direction, especially at a time like now. I mean, the early March, when you're getting a transfer quarterback, but I want to say this is a huge win for Tennessee, and I think it is a win for Tennessee. It's like you said, it's trending in the right direction. But I will say this. If I'm a Tennessee fan, I'm hoping I don't see Keller Christ next year at all. I mean, I'm hoping this guy gets buried on the depth chart. I'm hoping Garantano comes out and lights it up and wants to be a pro-style quarterback and can escape some of the pressure that you're going to have behind that offensive line next year. I'm hoping the same thing out of Will McBride. I'm hoping that both of these guys rise to this level of competition that Keller Christ, for everything you want to say good about him at Stanford, he lost that starting quarterback job. It's not like this guy was, the Pac-12 player of the year or something on offense. So I think it's a win, and I think it's big for Jeremy Pruitt. But if I'm a Tennessee fan, I just got to tell you, I hope this guy never sees the light of day in Neyland Stadium.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with you on that, because it's one thing to say, well, he lost his starting job at Stanford. Stanford's a program that has a great quarterback almost every single year. It's one thing, a lot of these other SEC transfers who've lost their jobs as like sort of middling programs. When it comes to the quarterback position, that's not what Stanford is. That JP Costello? I used to get his first name confused. He's a really good player. He's going to beat out a lot of guys for a job. That's not for me an indictment of Keller Christ. The fact of the matter is Garantano is a pretty good prospect, but he was recruited to play for a different system. The odds are he's not going to be very good for Jeremy Pruitt and Tyson Helm. That's just the odds are. McBride, I don't even know what to expect from him. I mean, he's just a guy.
Who knows?
So, you bring in Keller Christ. you got to avoid being terrible. You can't go 2-10. You can't go 3-9. Jeremy Pruitt's foundation for the future is sort of based on not being a total unmitigated embarrassment in his first year. You got to scratch and claw and find some wins. You've said before, win the games you're supposed to win with no quarterback to speak of. You can't even win those. Yeah. So you can't say sight unseen. I hope we don't see Keller Christ. You can't have that much confidence in McBride and Garantano to assume or even suggest that Keller Christ doesn't have at least an equal chance of winning this job.
Well, but is it sight unseen? We've seen Jerry Garantano for, what did he start, 7 games last year?
I mean, it wasn't any good.
We saw Garantano, though, is my point. If they're going to run a pro-style offense and really kind of lean on these running backs in this offensive line, then I'm just telling you, Keller Christ is not the guy I want back there. The offensive line's not going to be good. They're not going to be good. And so if you're telling me you want guys, if you want Tom Brady standing behind you that can't be as accurate as Tom Brady, because that's what Keller Christ is. He's like he's basically like an old guy standing back there, an old Peyton Manning back in the pocket. He's not going to move. I'd rather have Garantano, the guy that can roll out and make the plays on the run, and fit Garantano to this offense next year, rather than relying on a guy with Keller Christ, who, by the way, he might have committed right now, but the semester at Stanford's not over till like late June. So this guy's not going to be on campus anytime soon to be learning the offense. I'm just telling you right now, my money would be on Garantano if I'm a Tennessee fan.
Enrique Murillo in the YouTube comment section says the same thing. He's not even going to be around for spring practice. It's a total long shot for him to be the starter. But it's one thing to say starter opening day. It's another thing to say by the time the Florida game rolls around, typically 3 or 4 weeks into the season, that he couldn't be ready by then. And if you picture the kind of quarterback in a close game that's going to get hot and win you a game, I have a hard time believing that Garantano or McBride are going to have a better chance of being that guy than a guy like Keller Christ, who got the Stanford tutelage. I mean, Mike Bloomgren was a terrific offensive coordinator for a long time at Stanford. David Shaw is a super smart head coach there. I mean, you're getting some of that when you bring Keller Christ in. I'm not telling you he's going to set the world on fire. I'm not even telling you he's a good starter. I'm telling you that Tennessee is dangerously close to being terrible, and bringing in Keller Christ at least makes the chance of that happening a little bit less.
Well, you can look at the schedule. You can look at the Florida game early. That West Virginia game is going to be, that's going to be a tough one for him to get up to date in a month and a half.
Yeah, Tennessee may get clobbered in that game. They may get clobbered.
But my point being is that I'd rather have a guy, and this coming from an offensive lineman, I'd rather have a guy that can make plays behind me when he's getting overwhelmed in the pocket than a guy who's just going to stand there and take the sack. It's a personal preference. I don't know what Tennessee fans think. Maybe they think differently. Keller Christ, maybe they think going down the field will be an option for them next year. But boy, he's really going to be fighting an uphill battle in some of these early games, and Florida's just going to kind of add on top of that to me.
Let me do item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Speaking of quarterbacks, as we said earlier, South Carolina spring practice has began, and for South Carolina, a little bit of a new look offense here. Kurt Roper is gone. Brian McClendon is the new offensive coordinator. Dan Werner also in place there as a quarterbacks coach there in Columbia, and well, Jake Bentley's been talking about what he likes about the offense, and for him, one of the things he likes is not just the coaches that are in place here, but the wide receivers he gets to throw to on a daily basis. Here's a little bit of Jake Bentley talking about that new look Gamecocks offense.
I think if you see the plays our receivers are making, having Debo back, obviously, with Brian and Ortre and Drake being out there too, I think they've really opened my eyes on the plays they're making. And like I said, we're really trying to take advantage of the one-on-one matchups, and that's the big thing that they've done a great job so far of making plays.
I mean, seriously, for me, this South Carolina situation is so interesting because this team won 9 games last year. That's a record that may even almost sneak up on some people. They would assume that the record was less than that. That's a 9-win team from a year ago. Can they find that double digit this year? Can they get to that 10-win mark here this season? And this offense, I think, gives them a chance to do that because you mentioned Ortre Smith, Brian Edwards. I also had kind of Debo Samuel in that mix when he's back and playing again. All of a sudden, this becomes a real tough out because of the fact that with Will Muschamp, even with a talent that's still kind of rounding into form, they're going to play tough defense. But they're going to score some points here this season, and I think that Bentley's kind of interesting on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And you talk about Dan Werner obviously taking over the quarterback coaching position. I think this is Jake Bentley's actually 3rd quarterback coach in 3 years that he's been in the program. So that's tough on him. But I think Dan Werner brings kind of this situation where was it Bo Wallace he had first at Ole Miss, and then Chad Kelly, and really Jake Bentley kind of fits that style. I kind of like the marriage there, and I love how Jake Bentley's kind of taking it on and saying, listen, I love what's going on right here. I love what Brian McClendon's doing. Their receiving core is stacked for next year. I mean, if Debo Samuel's able to come back at 100%, and you talk about Brian Edwards or Trey Smith, some of the other guys they're going to have in that lineup, it's all going to be in front of them. I just question sometimes South Carolina the fact that, listen, I feel like they overreached last year on some of their wins. I mean, when you talk about one-score wins, when you talk about some of them going 50% and teams that are able to win close games, South Carolina was one of those teams that was able to win close games. Week in and week out, it was like there was never like a runaway game for South Carolina. It was like, it's going to be close, and then we're going to come out winning it. I have to wonder if there's not a little bit of correction to that this year. If some of those close games aren't able to pick them, and 10 wins for me, I think South Carolina's got the personnel to be able to do it, but boy, 10 wins for me is kind of reaching.
Sounds like on Facebook, Joel Anthony Dean agrees with you. He says USC Junior is going to go back to 6-6 this year, and I'm with you on the idea of the close win stuff. That's not a skill. That's not the thing that sort of sticks around from year to year. There's typically a little bit of a give back on that from one year to the next. If you go back and look, close win against NC State, 35-28. Close win against Louisiana Tech, just 17-16. A close game against Texas A&M that could have gone the other way. They lost that one 24-17. Close against Tennessee, won 15-9. Close against Vanderbilt, won 34-27. Close against Florida, at least a one-score game. They won 28-20. Kind of on and on you can go. Those kinds of close wins, even the bowl game against Michigan, also a close win, 26-19. Those are one-score games that have a tendency over time to even themselves out. If you go 6-1, 7-0 in those close games one year, you're looking at 3 or 4 of those being given back typically the following year.
Well, let me go back to South Carolina Fanzone and give you the good news. So the one-score game that I look at more than any is that bowl game against Michigan, because you did have Brian McClendon as your offense coordinator. Kurt Oper was already gone by then. You had some of the new kind of procedures in place in terms of their RPOs they're going to be running next year, and you had some of these spots that you were already going to lose. You had some of the depth that was really able to develop in these bowl practices and able to get at Michigan. I thought that was a huge – I mean, Michigan was like a top 3 defense last year. And so for South Carolina to be able to go out and put 26 points against Michigan, I thought was a good sign for the future. I just wonder – we're talking about 10 wins here. We're not talking about a good team, 8, 9 wins. We're talking about 10 wins. I think it's a little bit of a stretch for them.
Stuart Henderson, though, who's apparently a South Carolina fan, in response says, what are the 6 games that South Carolina is going to lose? And I think that's a fair question that Stuart asked there in our comment section. And what I would say is, as an argument for why that the typical regression from close wins to the next year may not happen for South Carolina is because Will Muschamp's upgrading this talent, in a way that Steve Spurrier, at the end of his run, was just not capable of doing. I've always said before that Spurrier had kind of turned that South Carolina job into sort of like the greeter at a Walmart. It's like the last job that an old man has before he retires.
Right.
That's kind of what Spurrier made the South Carolina coaching job. Will Muschamp's got that youthful energy. He brings in a J.C. Horn, a Jemias Williams, who's injured, not going through spring practice right now, but that was the defensive back from the last class. A Rick Sandage, a defensive tackle, who's going to play some. Will Muschamp's upgrading that roster. So the idea of, we won close games a year ago, we're going to give some of these back in 2018, maybe not, because the roster is going to be better.
Yeah, no, I agree. The roster is definitely getting better, but I don't think they're going to lose 6 games. So don't ask me what 6 games they're going to lose.
Well, that commenter.
Yeah, the comment definitely, what 6 games they're going to lose. First of all.
Well, no, a commenter had said they're going to lose 6 games.
No, I understand. I just, what 6 games they lose. I'm talking about the 10-win plateau, and I hate to say it this early, but I'm checking Georgia on that list. I'm checking Clemson on that list. That already gets you down to 10 at that point. And so show me that you can run the deck on the other 10 games on the schedule right now.
It's a great point. Let me actually pull that up for a second. That's a really good point, that if you're going to now you also have a bowl to get to 10. So let's say we'll give them a bowl to get to 10. Let me do this really quick. We'll give you a bowl win to get to 10, which means that you can only, if you're going to lose to South Carolina, if you're going to lose to Clemson, you're going to lose to Georgia, you can only lose one more game from a schedule that includes Marshall, at Vandy, at Kentucky, Missouri, Texas A&M, Tennessee, at Ole Miss, at Florida, at Clemson. You know what? I think they can do that.
You think they can get 10 wins?
I think they go 9-3 in the regular season and get to 10 with a bowl, or go 10-2 and lose a bowl. What game other than Clemson and Georgia is an impossible game for them? With all due respect, A&M I'm high on, but not first year for Jimbo Fisher. Tennessee's not good. Florida's not good. Ole Miss is not good. Missouri's not good. Kentucky's not good. Vanderbilt on the road is tricky, but you got to play somebody.
Well, I wouldn't go out and say any of them are impossible, but I'm kind of going about my track record we're talking about last year, where they beat an NC State team that they were, statistically they should have never won the game. They win by, 1 point to, Louisiana Tech.
Yeah.
So, you don't look at it and say, boy, I don't know which of those games are going to lose. I look at it as a whole and say, boy, can they run the table on the rest of those games? I just don't, at Florida is going to be a tough game for me. I think at Ole Miss is going to be a sneaky tough game. I think that as you get later in the year, teams like Florida and Ole Miss are going to be playing a lot better. And so, can they run the table other than Georgia and Clemson? that to me is a little bit of a task.
Couple quick comments. We're moving on. Kevin Chapman says Tennessee needs to go to the ACC if they play and lose to South Carolina and Vanderbilt this year. Steve Weaver says, if I'm talking about me, if I'm predicting South Carolina to go 10-2, he says I'm day drinking. This is like 2 weeks in a row I've been accused of being drunk on the air. If only that were the case, I can promise you that. Yeah. All right, let me do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Life First and 10 list. And I fear that I'm about to be unfair. I don't mean to be, but something about this just doesn't set right with me. Greg McElroy is the ESPN SEC network analyst. He goes on the Bull and Fox radio show in Cleveland. In addition to his duties as an analyst, McElroy is also a former Alabama quarterback. So it sort of stands to reason that the Cleveland radio guys asked the former Alabama quarterback to evaluate one of his brethren, another former Alabama quarterback, and at least for a while, teammate in A.J. McCarron. What does McElroy think about McCarron as a free agent quarterback in the NFL? And McElroy, I think, goes pretty hard in on A.J. McCarron. Take a listen to this.
A.J.'s a friend, so I've known him a long time, and I'm obviously rooting for him to become a starter. But if I have to put my analyst cap on, I have to ask the question, what's the difference between A.J., Brock Osweiler, and Mike Glennon? I have my questions there. We've seen backups get big money, and it just hasn't come to fruition. So it's not to say that he can't be different. It's just I don't have the proof to think otherwise. I think back to the time when he played in 2013. I think about his supporting cast. I mean, you guys remember how stacked that Bengals team was? I mean, Andy Dalton was an MVP before he broke his hand.
He was.
So I look at it and I hope A.J. gets paid a ton of money, and I hope he gets a chance to start. But if I'm a GM, I have my concerns and my doubts that he won't be like the other guys. I certainly hope he's not, because as a fan of his and as a fan of his family and having known him since he was 16 years old, I would love to see him to get that shot, because I know he wants it more than anything in the world. But I have my reservations a little bit if I'm going to be real analytical about how I'm evaluating some of these free agent propositions.
So that is the former Alabama quarterback turned analyst Greg McElroy on a Cleveland radio show talking about his former Alabama teammate and brethren there in arms when it comes to Alabama quarterbacks A.J. McCarron. One of McCarron's family members got wind of this and sent a tweet out in response to this that said, sad to see this man. Been in the same seats as you with my coach preaching family, whatever, whether it's jealousy, envy, whatever. You don't say that about family, about those that rep the crimson and white. This is Corey McCarron, by the way. But he's going to continue to win and shine when he does. Don't say a word. Greg McElroy comes back and says, I'd love to be wrong. I've always rooted for A.J., blah, 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 blah. Just a big picture on the opinion on free agent quarterbacks, bro. On the one hand, this is what analysts are supposed to do. They're supposed to give provocative opinions. They're supposed to, stir up, conversation. McElroy would appear to be doing his job. But something about him going that hard in on another Alabama quarterback on a Cleveland radio show when the NFL is not even really his beat to talk about, something about that just seems wrong to me. Am I being unfair to Greg McElroy?
I don't think you're being unfair at all. Listen, this is kind of a tough topic for me because both these guys were teammates of mine. I played with AJ and I played with Greg McElroy, and I consider, just like Greg said, I consider both these guys friends. So I'm kind of going down the same road right now that that Greg did when he's talking about AJ. But I think Corey McCarron, when his response to this, brought up a good point. It's supposed to be family. I mean, Greg says it. Listen, I've known the guy since he was 16. I've known him going back, 13, 14 years. I've known his family. I've known all these guys. I've been in the room with him. I don't think you're supposed to talk like that about family if you're Greg. If you've known a guy that long, just hope for the best for him. For me, I mean, that's how I am. That's how I try to treat everybody that I know when I talk about on the show. I know some of these coaches we talk about. I know some of these players. Hope for the best for them. And to me, you always give them the benefit of the doubt. And he did not give AJ the benefit of the doubt in that conversation. Mike Glennon and Brock Osweiler. Why not give your boy the benefit of the doubt? If you're that good of friends with him and you go that far back with his family, it's kind of like somebody being like, boy, is your dad, the best dad, of all? Well, of course he is. He's my dad. And so I think that you have to approach it that way more if you're with Greg. Greg sometimes, to me, gets a little bit out of touch when he talks about guys like that. I know he's trying to be objective, and he does a good job. I think Greg does a really good job for the SEC Network of being objective. But, boy, sometimes when you've sat in a chair next to this guy in a meeting room, sometimes you just need to learn how to keep your mouth shut.
Two very different opinions. Richard Smith says, so, don't do your job. Edna Grayson, though, says you don't talk about family. Here's the thing, though. Greg McElroy's job is not to criticize A.J. McCarron. He's not an NFL analyst, and he's never going to be. No one even knows that Greg McElroy played in the NFL, okay? I mean, Greg McElroy's job, you know what it is? It's to make Alabama fans happy. The reason why he's on TV is because he played Alabama. If he didn't play at Alabama, he wouldn't be on the SEC network. You use the platform that you have to get where you are. That's McElroy's job. Say things that Alabama fans are going to like. Say things that SEC fans are going to care about. It's not to evaluate free agent quarterbacks in a Cleveland radio show. So if McElroy thinks he's doing his job by evaluating that, I think that he's delusional because he ain't getting a different job than the one he has right now. He's not going to be an NFL analyst.
It's tough for me because, like I said, I know both these guys. I consider both friends, but I do feel like Greg kind of stepped outside of his boundary. It's like I said, you give the benefit of the doubt, and people bring up, that's his job. He has to be objective. He's one of these, he's one of these people that gets on radio and talks about quarterback. Do you want to give up your friends or you want to give up your family over your job? I think most people would say no. I'm not willing to give up friends or people that I consider friends because somebody wants me to talk about it. And it's not even like he was being like, somebody said, be critical of AJ.
Right.
What do you want to say? He went on his own right and said, I don't know that he's really worth that much money as a backup quarterback or one of these guys who has a ceiling. And so I just feel like if you're given the opportunity to sidestep it and you do consider this guy family and a friend, that's just my personal opinion. You try to step around it.
Plus, objectivity is totally overrated. A, it becomes predictable. And B, looking at the NFL analysts on Sunday, how many of them don't even pretend to be objective on anything? Right. Ditka always picked the Bears. So-and-so always picks the Cowboys. That's just the nature of how that goes.
Yeah, I don't think Greg meant to, it said, did Greg rip A.J. McCarron? I don't know. He was just critical of him. And to me, it's you try to sidestep it when given the opportunity. I don't think you do that. If you consider somebody family, and it's like Corey McCarron said, and Greg said the same thing. You've gone back that far. I just feel like you try to sidestep it if you're family. You don't throw your family really under the bus.
Glenn Hayes says, hey, the truth hurts sometimes. What he's saying may be truthful, but doesn't mean that that's the time to say it. Morgan Rection also says maybe McElroy's a little salty that AJ's still in the league. There may be some of that as well. It seems like one of McCarron's family members sort of thought that was the case. Let me do item number 8 here on our SEC Country Line, 1st and 10. So we talked a lot back during bowl season about the fact that Carlton Davis, the Auburn defensive back, was not going to play. It was sort of murky circumstances as to why, but now Davis, I guess, is trying to sort of shed some light on what caused him to miss the game against UCF, and frankly, I'm not so sure he's helping his cause here. Here is Carlton Davis from the NFL Combine to AL.com on the subject. He says, when I was at home, I had a sinus infection. I was really clogged up, and I was taking antibiotics. I thought going up there, being around the football atmosphere, would help me settle down, but it kind of made it worse. I didn't feel like I was ready to go out there and compete at a high level. The assumption on my part is Davis didn't play in the bowl game because he didn't want to get injured going in the draft, which I don't have a problem with. But if he didn't play in the game because he had a sinus infection, I'd have a huge problem with that because if all you got's a headache, I got to have you on the field.
Right.
So as a way of sort of covering up for what I'm going to assume is one tiny white lie, it almost seems like Davis, if he were to be believed, and I don't think many scouts do, but if he were to be believed, it almost seems like he's creating for himself a bigger problem. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would go down that road and say yeah. And I, listen, I don't know if the guy's healthy. I don't know if he's got a sinus infection, how bad off he is. But I looked to his teammates' comments right after this happened. I mean, and I have Trey Matthews right here. I need you, man. He said he called him, said, I need you, man. You're going to leave me hanging like that? And then he also says, I would have played. Trey Williams, the same way. It's all his decision. He's an adult now. The coaches started kind of avoiding the conversation at that point. But I go back to his players and say, his teammates really kind of know the inside on it. And I think that you can kind of read through some of their comments around bowl season and say, boy, this really was his decision. This wasn't, I just can't pull it off. I mean, when you have a sinus infection or whatever, boy, a week. I mean, they're at the bowl site for a week and they get sent home. I don't know how far I'm taking them.
I don't have a problem with Carlton Davis making a business decision not to play in the game. But I got to have my football players playing if they got a sinus infection. So if this is the story that you've made up, I mean, right? I mean, if you got a sinus infection, you're playing, right?
Yeah, no, and that's kind of where I go back to is that I think that he would have been better off stepping in front of these NFL teams and just said, listen, I heard I was a first-round pick. I knew I was going to leave school. I didn't see any upside to playing in the game against UCF. And I think people respect that. But if you come out and say a sinus infection and your teammates are saying something different and your coaches are saying something different, then people start to scratch their head and say, boy, are we really getting the true story here? I don't know if we are.
Now, let me do item number 9 on our SEC Country Life 1st and 10 list. First of all, let me start with the Knoxville News-Sentinel, who has a report about John Curry, the former Tennessee athletic director. And I say former, although for him it's just as good as it ever was. Knoxville News-Sentinel, we got the a little bit from the reporter here, Blake Topmeyer, who says that more than 3 months after being ousted from his role as Tennessee's athletic director, John Curry remains suspended with pay while the university works toward a resolution. That pay, Mike, is $75,000 a month. John Curry's been getting paid $75,000 a month to do nothing. What a disaster for Tennessee. This is all while they negotiate the buyout here, but what a disaster.
Yeah, I was going to say, they have to reach a settlement because do you know when this contract's up, when the $75,000 a month ends? Like 4.5 years from now. It's like July 2022, John Curry's contract is up. So he would get $75,000 a month. Until then, if they don't find some kind of buyout or some kind of settlement here in the next couple of months.
Is the PR worth it, what you get for not having Curry employed anymore? Is it worth $75,000 a month?
I got to tell you, I don't know the inner workings of this situation, but if I'm John Curry, I'm asking for a ton as far as settlement goes because, there's always going to be this wording, and you'll probably hear this, any of the Tennessee fans that go in depth on this, there's going to be, boy, part of the settlement is Tennessee's got, their references to other schools, they got to talk good about John Curry. I mean, that's how these buyouts and settlements go. Boy, I mean, his reputation took such a ding. And, Tennessee fans that have watched the show, I think it's his own fault. I mean, I don't fault Tennessee fans for how they acted, but when you talk about getting a settlement and you're talking about 4 more years of $75,000 a month, $900,000 a year or whatever it is, boy, I'm going to ask for a ton if I'm John Curry. You're not going to get away from that table with me easily.
I'm going to ask for the whole thing. By the way, quick update on the story we've talked about a lot. Knoxville News-Sentinel also on hand to see the coming down of the Butch Jones facade there from the Tennessee Jumbotron. For those that had been concerned about the presence of the Jumbotron, the Butch Jones picture, that is no more. So as somebody pointed out on Twitter, I thought they said they had to order a crane. No crane doing this, just a bunch of guys in a scaffold. Now that's a tough job.
Yeah, it definitely is. I feel like we should have some background music for this. It feels like this should have some kind of dramatic, it's finally coming down, the era is over kind of
That's
thing.
a good idea. Maybe we'll do that a little bit in the days ahead. I wish I would have thought of that in time to do that today. Item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live, 1st and 10. We were so late, y'all. I wish we had more time for some of these latter topics. We got going a little long on a couple of these a little earlier. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing what Florida coach Dan Mullen tweeted out. So they're doing some agility drills or whatever, and as a way of kind of having some fun with these athletic agility drills, they get together and play a little basketball. Take a look at the Florida football team here going through some basketball workouts together. And as we watch this, Mike, I want to ask you here, is this a good idea? I mean, most of the high school coaches that I've known hate basketball. They think it's the most dangerous thing a football player can do. It's going to end his career. Are you surprised that Florida is okay with the football guys putting their ankles at risk like this?
I had no idea you were going to ask me that question, but I was about to go in on the idea of these guys jumping up. First of all, I had a friend that went to college, I went to high school with. He dislocated his ankle doing this as a conditioning drill at a smaller school. It's just, you're jumping up and down. There's ACLs, there's ankles on the line, there's feet on the line. I don't like it at all that these guys are up here playing basketball in a competitive nature. Now, if you want to get out there and run around, do some kind of relay race, do that kind of drill, that's fine with me. But I'm telling you right now, this is not a good ididea.
Was that Felipe that dunked that there? Was that Felipe Franks that got the dunk there at the end?
I don't know who that was.
Yeah, so I think it's all in fun. I'm sort of glad they shot the video of it. I'm a little bit surprised they let it go on.
This goes to the new strength and conditioning maybe with Nick Savage and that whole thing going on. I'm not a fan of it. I wouldn't want to see Alabama doing it. I'm sure most of the fans out there wouldn't want to see their squads doing it either.
All right, here on SEC Country Live, even when we're running late, we always close the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life. And, last week we talked about the situation at Texas A&M, an issue that I didn't have as much of a problem with as some people did, but the A&M chancellor giving the plaque to Jimbo Fisher of that national championship, sort of to be named later. Here is a reminder of kind of how that goes down. So he's basically given the plaque that says, hey, you're going to win the national championship, but they don't really say what year. You have to sort of fill that in. So a lot of folks on social media have had some fun with that since then, including the police station there in College Station, who I guess are, as a way of kind of doing their own public service announcement, say, City of College Station, everybody locks their cars, and they just sort of fill in the date that's going to happen. Apparently that's a little bit of an issue there at College Station, folks leaving their car unlocked and getting stuff stolen out of there. And so the College Station police having some fun with the Jimbo Fisher video. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, hashtag 9 p.m. routine. I've definitely, listen, I'm all on board with it. I've had my car broken into before. I think it's a good play on words and champion of life, I guess.
Yeah, pretty good job there by the College Station folks. And listen, I don't have a problem with what Texas A&M is doing. I like the fact that they're creating a little bit of attention there. Speaking of creating some attention, we hope we've done a good job of maintaining yours today. If you want to hear the podcast, we'll have it up for you on Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud immediately when the show is over. You can also share the show with your friends on Facebook. Thanks for watching on YouTube, and we'll be back again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of SEC Country Live.